The architecture of power, rebuilding the human foundation. The human body is a masterpiece of biological engineering, yet its primary load-bearing pillars are consistently undervalued. This is not merely about physical vanity, it is a critical investigation into structural integrity and metabolic longevity. For the novice, the descent into lower body training is often paralyzed by complexity and the looming threat of injury. We have stripped away the bro science to reveal the biomechanical essentials necessary for constructing a durable physique. The blueprint for absolute strength starts with the fundamental movement pattern of our species.
To understand the basic squat is to understand the history of the human species, a narrative written not in ink but in the articulation of bone and the firing of synapses. Before the invention of the chair, before the ergonomic office setup, and before the sedentary pathology of the 21st century rewired our nervous systems, the squat was our primary resting posture. It was the stance of the gatherer, the position of the laborer, and the grounded state of the warrior waiting for battle. In the modern fitness landscape, the squat is frequently reduced to a mere leg day staple, a box to be checked in a hurry routine. This reductionist view serves as a tragic disservice to what is arguably the single most important movement pattern in the human repertoire. For the beginner, mastering the basic squat, often referred to as the air squat or bodyweight squat, is not simply about building quadriceps, it is a reclamation project. It is the arduous process of undoing decades of structural neglect and reintroducing the body to its intended biomechanical function. When we analyze the squat, we are analyzing the king of exercises, a title it holds not because of gym lore, but because of its unrivaled capacity to trigger systemic anabolic changes, fortify bone density through Wolff's Law, and integrate the entire kinetic chain into a symphony of synchronized force production. The anatomy of the squat is a masterclass in biological leverage. It begins, counterintuitively, not at the knees but at the feet. For the uninitiated, the foot is often treated as a passive slab of meat, stuffed into cushioned sneakers that dull proprioception. However, in the context of a properly executed squat, the foot is a dynamic tripod. The beginner must learn to distribute weight evenly between the calcaneus, heel, the first metatarsal head, big toe mount, and the fifth metatarsal head, pinky toe mount. This triangular base provides the sensory feedback required for the central nervous system to permit deep flexion. If the weight shifts too far forward onto the toes, the shearing force on the patellar tendon increases exponentially, inviting the chronic knee pain that discourages so many novices. Conversely, if the weight shifts entirely to the heel without toe engagement, stability is compromised and the posterior chain loses its tension.
The grip of the foot against the floor initiates a torque known as rooting, which travels up the tibia, stabilizes the knee, and activates the gluteal complex before the descent even begins. This is the hidden intellectual depth of the squat. It is a movement that is won or lost before gravity takes over. As we move up the kinetic chain, we encounter the hips, the fulcrum of the entire movement. The most pervasive error in modern populations is the inability to dissociate hip movement from lumbar movement. Due to the tightening of the hip flexors, specifically the iliopsoas and rectus femoris, caused by prolonged sitting, the average beginner has forgotten how to hinge. When instructed to squat, they instinctively drive their knees forward, keeping their torso upright. This knee-dominant strategy places the entire load on the delicate architecture of the knee joint, while leaving the powerhouse muscles of the posterior chain, the gluteus maximus and hamstrings, dormant. The correct execution of the basic squat requires a conscious, almost exaggerated hip break. The athlete must initiate the movement by unlocking the hips and pushing the pelvis rearward, as if reaching for an invisible seat far behind them. This action, known as the hip hinge, preloads the hamstrings and glutes, utilizing the massive tensile strength of these muscle groups to control the descent. It is a shift from relying on the skeletal structure to relying on the muscular suspension system. The descent phase, or the eccentric portion of the lift, is where the battle for control takes place. Gravity is the constant adversary, and the beginner's goal is to resist it with uniform tension. As the hips travel back and down, the knees must track laterally, pushing outward over the toes. This cue, often summarized as knees out, is critical for preventing valgus collapse, a dangerous condition where the knees cave inward, placing immense strain on the anterior cruciate ligament (ACL) and medial collateral ligament (MCL). By actively driving the knees outward, the squatter engages the gluteus medius, a smaller muscle on the side of the hip responsible for stabilization. This creates a stable tunnel for the pelvis to drop into. The depth of the squat is a subject of much debate, often clouded by internet bravado. For the absolute beginner, the goal is to achieve a position where the hip crease is parallel with the top of the knee. This parallel standard is not arbitrary. It is the point where maximal muscular recruitment occurs without requiring the extreme mobility of an Olympic weightlifter. Going deeper, or ass to grass, requires a level of ankle dorsiflexion and hip mobility that most modern adults simply do not possess initially. Forcing this depth prematurely leads to butt wink, or lumbar flexion, where the lower back rounds at the bottom of the movement, exposing the intervertebral discs to dangerous compressive forces. The ascent, or concentric phase, is the expression of power. It is not merely a matter of standing up, it is an act of pushing the earth away. The drive must originate from the middle of the foot, traveling up through the heels. The glutes must contract violently to extend the hips, bringing the pelvis back to a neutral position. A common mistake here is the stripper squat, where the hips shoot up faster than the chest, turning the movement into a dangerous hybrid of a squat and a stiff-legged deadlift. To prevent this, the beginner must maintain a chest-up posture, preserving the thoracic extension established at the start. The core musculature plays a vital role here. The concept of intra-abdominal pressure, IAP, is paramount. Before descending, the squatter should take a deep diaphragmatic breath, expanding the belly rather than the chest, and brace the abdominal wall as if preparing to take a punch. This brace creates a pneumatic cylinder of support for the spine, preventing the energy leaks that lead to lower back injury. Beyond the mechanics, the basic squat holds a mirror to our physiological health. It is a metabolic furnace. Because it recruits the largest muscle groups in the body simultaneously, the caloric expenditure of the squat is significantly higher than isolation movements like leg extensions. Furthermore, the systemic stress placed on the body by squatting triggers a potent endocrine response. Research suggests that compound movements like the squat can acutely elevate levels of testosterone and human growth hormone, chemical messengers that are essential not just for muscle growth, but for tissue repair, fat loss, and anti-aging. For the beginner, this means that squatting does not just transform the legs, it transforms the entire biological environment of the body. It signals the system to adapt, to grow stronger, and to become more resilient. However, the psychological barrier cannot be ignored. The squat is uncomfortable.
It requires a level of exertion that feels foreign to the unconditioned body. It forces the heart to pump harder to supply oxygen to the massive thigh muscles, leading to breathlessness that can induce panic in the novice. This is where the discipline of the mind-muscle connection begins. The beginner must learn to interpret this discomfort not as pain or injury, but as the sensation of work. They must learn to visualize the muscle fibers stretching and contracting, turning a physical chore into a mindful practice. The basic squat is also a diagnostic tool. A tightness in the ankles reveals poor dorsiflexion. A collapse in the knees reveals weak glutes. A rounding of the back reveals a weak core. In this way, the squat is the ultimate lie detector. It exposes every weakness in the chain, providing a clear roadmap for where the beginner needs to focus their rehabilitation efforts. Ultimately, the basic squat is the foundation upon which all other lower body strength is built. It is the prerequisite for the lunge, the jump, and the sprint. It translates directly to the functional activities of daily life, standing up from a sofa, picking up a child, lifting a heavy box. As we age, the ability to squat correlates directly with independence. The loss of leg strength is the primary precursor to falls in the elderly, which are often the beginning of a terminal decline. By mastering the basic squat now, the beginner is essentially purchasing an insurance policy for their future mobility. It is a return to our evolutionary roots, a rejection of the sedentary fragility that defines the modern era, and the first true step toward physical sovereignty.
2. Chair squat, the tactile blueprint for controlled mastery. If the basic squat is the raw, primal expression of human movement, the chair squat is the refined, calculated tool of the architect. It is often dismissed by the ego-driven fitness culture as a geriatric exercise or a regression solely for the infirm. This perspective is not only arrogant but scientifically illiterate. The chair squat, or box squat as it is known in high-performance powerlifting circles, is arguably the most effective teaching tool for biomechanics in existence. It serves as the bridge between the fear of falling and the mastery of depths. For the beginner, the open air behind them during a standard squat is a psychological abyss. The fear of losing balance triggers a fight-or-flight response, causing the body to tense up, shorten the range of motion, and shift weight to the toes to catch oneself. The chair squat eliminates this neural panic. By placing a physical object behind the athlete, we provide a safety net that allows the brain to unlock the hips and permit true posterior displacement. It transforms the abstract concept of sitting back into a literal tactile objective. The brilliance of the chair squat lies in its ability to enforce the hip hinge mechanism discussed in the basic squat, but with standard or consistency. In a freestanding squat, the depth can vary from repetition to repetition. Fatigue, distraction, or a lack of proprioception can cause the beginner to cut the movement short, stopping well above parallel. The chair provides an immutable standard. The rep does not count until the glutes make contact with the seat. This binary feedback loop, touch or no touch, is invaluable for motor learning. It removes the ambiguity from the exercise, allowing the novice to focus entirely on body positioning, rather than wondering where their body is in space. This is the essence of external cueing, a coaching strategy proven to be superior to internal cueing for skill acquisition. Instead of thinking, and knees 90 degrees, the athlete thinks, find the chair. Biomechanically, the chair squat fundamentally alters the physics of the movement in a way that is highly advantageous for beginners with knee issues or weak posterior chains. When a person squats to a box or chair, they are able to sit back further than they would in a free squat. This extreme rearward hip displacement shifts the center of gravity,
significantly reducing the shear force on the knee joint, tibiofemoral shear. The tibia, shin bone, can remain more vertical, which decreases the pressure on the patellar tendon. For the millions of beginners who approach fitness with pre-existing runner's knee or patellofemoral pain syndrome, the chair squat is often the only
way to train the quadriceps without exacerbating their condition. It effectively deloads the anterior chain, quads, knees, and overloads the posterior chain, hamstrings, glutes, forcing the muscles that are usually dormant in modern humans to wake up and accept the load. There is a profound distinction to be made in the execution of the chair squat, the difference between touch and go and the dead stop. For the absolute beginner, the exercise often begins as a sit-to-stand drill. They start in the seated position, feet planted, and learn to generate the force required to stand up. This concentric-only movement is the most functional strength builder for daily life. However, as they progress to starting from a standing position, the dead stop technique becomes a powerful weapon for building explosive strength. By descending to the chair, sitting completely, and pausing for 1 second, the athlete breaks the eccentric-concentric chain. In a normal squat, the muscles and tendons store elastic energy on the way down, the stretch shortening cycle, which acts like a rubber band to help bounce the body back up. By pausing on the chair, this elastic energy dissipates. The body must then generate force from a state of zero momentum. This static dynamic contraction recruits a higher number of motor units and fast-twitch muscle fibers, building starting strength that is often lacking in beginners. The chair squat also serves as a potent diagnostic and corrective tool for asymmetry. Because the movement is slowed down and stabilized by the target, the beginner has the mental bandwidth to observe their knees. Do they cave in, as they near the seat? Does one hip touch the chair before the other? Does the weight shift to the left foot to avoid loading the weaker right leg? The chair acts as a truth teller. It reveals the imbalances that are often masked by momentum in a standard squat. Furthermore, the height of the chair can be adjusted using cushions or books to facilitate a progressive range of motion. A beginner with severe mobility restrictions might start with a high stack of cushions on the chair,
squatting only a few inches. As strength and flexibility improve, layers are removed, gradually increasing the depth until they are squatting to a standard chair height, usually 17-19 inches or lower. This progressive distance training is a scientifically sound method for rehabilitating injuries and safely increasing mobility. Culturally and anthropologically, the chair squat is the antidote to the very device it utilizes. The chair is the symbol of modern sedentarism. We sit in cars, we sit at desks, we sit at dinner, and we sit on couches to watch television. This chronic sitting places the hip flexors in a constantly shortened state, and the glutes in a constantly lengthened, deactivated state, a phenomenon famously termed gluteal amnesia by spinal biomechanist Dr. Stuart McGill. The chair squat uses the instrument of our destruction to facilitate our reconstruction. It teaches the body to actively engage with the seated position rather than passively collapsing into it. Every repetition of a chair squat is a neurological reprogramming session, teaching the glutes to fire before the body comes to rest. It turns the act of sitting down from a passive collapse into an active eccentric loading exercise. From a safety perspective, the chair squat is unmatched. In a gym environment, failing a squat with a barbell on your back can be catastrophic without safety bars or spotters. Even with body weight, losing balance backward can result in a concussion or tailbone injury. The chair eliminates this risk entirely. If the beginner's muscles fail or if they lose their balance, the result is simply that they are sitting down. This psychological safety net cannot be overstated. It allows the beginner to push their limits, to test their endurance, and to experiment with foot width and toe angle, all without the looming threat of injury. This encourages a spirit of exploration and consistency, which are the two most critical factors in long-term fitness adherence. Furthermore, the chair squat has immense implications for longevity and mortality. The sitting rising test, SRT, developed by Brazilian physician Claudio Gil Araujo, is a clinical predictor of all-cause mortality. While the strict version of the test involves sitting on the floor, the ability to stand from a chair without using one's hands is a direct correlate. The chair squat trains this exact motor pattern.
It builds the quadriceps strength necessary to extend the knee against gravity and the core stability required to transfer that force through the torso. For the aging population, the inability to perform this movement is the threshold between independent living and assisted care. By drilling the chair squat early in one's fitness journey, the beginner is not just building muscle, they are fortifying their future independence. Technique nuances in the chair squat allow for endless variation. Beginners can focus on the tempo, taking 4 slow seconds to descend to the chair, barely kissing the upholstery and exploding up. This eccentric focus causes more microtrauma to the muscle fibers, which is the stimulus for hypertrophy, muscle growth. They can also practice offset loading by holding a water bottle or weight in one hand, forcing the core to resist rotation while squatting to the chair. The humble chair becomes a versatile gym machine. In conclusion, the chair squat is not a lesser version of the squat. It is a foundational pillar of lower body mechanics. It teaches the hips to hinge, the knees to track, and the core to brace, all within a controlled environment that prioritizes safety and precision. It allows the beginner to bypass the neural inhibition of fear and access the full potential of their posterior chain. It transforms a household object into a laboratory for human movement, proving that effective training does not require expensive equipment or gym memberships, only gravity, a surface, and the will to stand up.
3. Step back lunge, the asymmetrical antidote to knee pathology. If the squat is the king of bilateral strength, the lunge is the undisputed sovereign of asymmetrical functionality.
Yet within the family of lunging patterns, forward, walking, lateral, and curtsy, the step-back lunge, or reverse lunge, stands apart as the definitive movement for the novice athlete. To understand why, we must first dissect the biomechanical crisis of the modern knee. The knee joint is often described by orthopedic surgeons as a dumb joint. It is situated between the hip and the ankle, two highly mobile joints that dictate its fate. The knee simply does what it is told, and in the context of the forward lunge, it is often told to absorb an immense amount of deceleration force. When a beginner steps forward into a lunge, the momentum of the torso travels anteriorly. Upon foot strike, the quadriceps must violently contract to act as a brake, preventing the knee from shooting past the toes and collapsing. This creates massive shear force across the patellofemoral joint. For a beginner with undeveloped connective tissue or pre-existing inflammation, the forward lunge is not an exercise, it is an injury mechanism. The step-back lunge fundamentally rewrites this kinetic equation. By stepping backward, the athlete removes the element of deceleration. The front leg, the working leg, remains anchored to the floor. The center of mass moves backward and down rather than forward and down. This subtle reversal of direction alters the physics of the movement entirely. The tibia, shin bone, of the front leg naturally stays closer to a vertical angle. In the world of biomechanics, a vertical shin is the holy grail of knee health. When the shin is vertical, the load is shifted away from the knee joint and transferred into the posterior chain, the hamstrings and the glutes. The step-back lunge transforms a knee-dominant movement into a hip-dominant movement, allowing the beginner to train the legs intensely without grinding the cartilage behind the kneecap. It is the biomechanical equivalent of having your cake and eating it too, maximum muscular stimulus with minimal skeletal risk. The historical lineage of the lunge is surprisingly aristocratic. While the squat has roots in primal labor, the lunge traces its formalized codification to the fencing halls of Renaissance Europe. The term itself is derived from the French allonger, meaning to lengthen. In the 16th and 17th centuries,
masters of the sword realized that the ability to extend one's reach while maintaining a stable base was the difference between life and death. The lunge was not exercised for hypertrophy, it was drilled for martial efficacy. It required the fencer to drop their center of gravity rapidly to evade a blade or extend it to deliver a thrust. This martial heritage highlights the inherent stability challenge of the movement. Unlike the squat, where the base of support is a wide rectangle formed by two parallel feet, the lunge narrows that base significantly. For the beginner, the step-back lunge is their first introduction to the concept of dynamic instability. This instability is a feature, not a bug. When the beginner steps back, their body is momentarily supported by a single leg. This triggers a cascade of neurological firing patterns that do not occur during bilateral exercises. The gluteus medius and minimus, the stabilizers on the side of the hip, must fire aggressively to prevent the pelvis from tilting sideways, Trendelenburg gait. The small muscles of the foot and ankle, the intrinsic stabilizers, must work overtime to grip the floor. The core must resist rotation. This is what trainers mean when they talk about functional training. It is training that mirrors the demands of locomotion. Walking, running, and climbing are all unilateral activities. We spend our lives on one leg at a time. By mastering the step-back lunge, the beginner is not just building muscle, they are upgrading the software of their nervous system to handle the complexities of human movement. The execution of the step-back lunge requires a level of mindfulness that borders on meditation. The setup begins with a neutral stance, feet hip-width apart. A common error is the tightrope phenomenon, where the beginner steps directly behind the front foot, narrowing their base to a single line. This destroys balance. The goal is to step back as if on train tracks, maintaining the hip-width distance throughout the movement. As the leg travels back, the weight must remain firmly planted on the heel and midfoot of the front leg. The back leg acts merely as a kickstand. The toes touch the ground to provide balance, but they should bear as little weight as possible. The descent should be controlled, a slow lowering of the hips until the back knee hovers an inch above the ground. The torso angle is a variable that can be manipulated.
An upright torso emphasizes the stretch on the back leg's hip flexor and loads the front quadriceps. A slight forward lean, hinging at the hips, engages the glute of the front leg more significantly. For beginners, a slight forward lean is often recommended, as it further protects the lower back and knees. One of the most profound benefits of the step-back lunge is its role in correcting asymmetry. Almost every human being is imbalanced. We have a dominant leg, favored for kicking, jumping, or leading upstairs. Over decades, this dominance creates a strength discrepancy that can lead to pelvic torsion and chronic pain. When a beginner squats, the stronger leg will subconsciously take on more of the load, exacerbating the imbalance. The barbell does not care which leg lifts it. The lunge, however, forces an honest accounting. Each leg must pull its own weight. There is no hiding. The beginner will quickly discover that their left leg might be 20% weaker than their right, or that their right hip lacks the stability of the left. This diagnostic capability allows for targeted correction. By performing extra repetitions on the weaker side, the athlete can restore structural symmetry, which is the foundation of long-term durability. The metabolic demand of the step-back lunge is also deceptively high. Because stabilizing the body requires the co-contraction of so many muscle groups, the oxygen cost of the exercise is significant. It elevates the heart rate rapidly, bridging the gap between resistance training and cardiovascular conditioning. Furthermore, the dynamic stretch applied to the hip flexors of the rear leg is a crucial antidote to the sitting disease of modern life. Tight hip flexors, iliopsoas, pull the pelvis into an anterior tilt, causing lower back pain and protruding abdominals.
The bottom position of a step-back lunge places the rear hip in extension, actively stretching these chronically tight tissues under load. This loaded stretching is far more effective for increasing flexibility than passive static stretching because it teaches the nervous system that it is safe to be strong in that extended range. As we look toward the future of fitness, the step-back lunge is poised to overtake the forward lunge as the standard recommendation for general populations. The rise of the longevity movement, spearheaded by figures who prioritize joint health over maximum lifting numbers,
favors exercises that offer high stimulus with low connective tissue cost. The step-back lunge fits this criterion perfectly. It is scalable. It can be done with body weight, dumbbells, kettlebells, or a barbell. It is safe. If balance is lost, the athlete simply brings the back foot forward. It is arguably the most intelligent leg exercise for the beginner, a movement that respects the intricate design of the knee while forging legs of iron. It is a negotiation with gravity where the terms are strictly in the athlete's favor.
4. Low step-up, the physics of elevation and the fallacy of height. The step-up is perhaps the most misunderstood exercise in the beginner's arsenal. On the surface, it appears to be the simplest of movements. Place a foot on a box and stand up. It mimics the everyday action of climbing stairs, an activity so mundane it barely registers as exercise. However, beneath this deceptive simplicity lies a minefield of biomechanical errors that can render the movement useless or even dangerous. The inclusion of the word low in this entry is not a suggestion, it is a critical prescription. The pervasive ego-driven culture of the gym often compels beginners to select the highest box available, equating height with difficulty and effectiveness. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of hip mechanics. When a beginner places their foot on a box that is too high, where the knee is above the hip, the pelvis is forced into a posterior tilt, tucking under, and the lumbar spine rounds. From this compromised position, the gluteus maximus is mechanically disadvantaged. It cannot contract effectively to extend the hip. Instead, the athlete must rely on momentum, swinging their arms and pushing off the bottom leg to hoist themselves up. This is not a leg exercise. It is a flailing gymnastic maneuver that builds nothing but bad habits. The low step-up, defined as using a step height where the knee is below the hip crease, usually 12 to 16 inches for an average adult, changes the paradigm. It keeps the pelvis neutral and the spine aligned. It places the glute and hamstring in a position of optimal leverage. The objective of the low step-up is not merely to get to the top of the box. The objective is to lift the entire body weight using only the lead leg. This requires a level of strict muscular isolation that is incredibly humbling. Most beginners, when forced to perform a step-up correctly, realize they lack the strength to lift their own body weight on one leg without cheating. The primary cheat in the step-up is the contribution of the rear leg, the leg on the floor. In a poorly executed step-up, the rear calf fires, plantar flexing the ankle to jump the body upward. This momentum bypasses the work required by the lead leg. To combat this, the low step-up must be performed with what coaches call a dead leg or toe-up cue. The beginner should imagine the floor as hot lava or a sheet of glass. The back foot should gently kiss the floor and then lift.
With the toes pulled up toward the shin, dorsiflexion, to prevent the calf from pushing off, all the force must be generated by driving the heel of the lead leg into the box. This mental shift transforms the exercise from a cardio bouncing routine into a grueling strength movement. The descent or eccentric phase of the low step-up is where the true magic happens. In many exercises, the lowering phase is an afterthought. In the step-up, it is the primary driver of strength gains and injury prevention. Gravity wants to pull the body down rapidly. The beginner must fight this gravitational pull, lowering themselves in slow motion, taking 3 to 4 seconds to touch the ground. This eccentric control requires massive recruitment of the quadriceps and glutes. It is during this lengthening under load that the muscle fibers experience the micro tears necessary for growth. Furthermore, this slow descent trains the knee to track properly. The knee must stay aligned with the second and third toes, resisting the urge to collapse inward, valgus. Learning to control the descent of a step-up is essentially learning how to absorb force, which is the mechanism that prevents ACL tears and falls in daily life. Historically, the step-up has deep roots in cardiovascular testing. The Harvard Step Test, developed at the Harvard Fatigue Laboratory during World War II, used a 20-inch step to evaluate the aerobic fitness of soldiers. While effective for testing endurance, the 20-inch height is biomechanically excessive for strength training in the average population. The modern shift toward the low step-up represents an evolution from testing capacity to building capability. It acknowledges that range of motion is only valuable if it can be controlled. By lowering the box, we lower the barrier to entry and raise the quality of a contraction. The low step-up is also a potent tool for hypertrophy, muscle growth, specifically for the gluteus maximus. Biomechanical studies using electromyography, EMG, have shown that the step-up elicits some of the highest levels of glute activation of any exercise, provided the torso is slightly leaned forward. This forward lean increases the moment arm of the hip, placing more load on the posterior chain. If the torso is upright, the load shifts more toward the quadriceps. This versatility allows the beginner to target specific weaknesses.
For those with weak glutes, a common ailment caused by sitting, the low step-up with a forward hinge is a prescription for waking up dormant tissue. From a rehabilitation standpoint, the low step-up is often the first closed kinetic chain exercise introduced after knee surgery. Unlike the leg extension machine, which places shear force on the knee by applying resistance at the ankle, the step-up compresses the joint, which is generally safer and more stable. The low aspect is crucial here. A patient can start with a 2-inch step, like a thick book, and progress inch by inch as pain and strength allow. This micro-progression is impossible with most gym machines. It allows the beginner to find their pain-free ROM and expand it over time. It teaches the brain that the knee is capable of bearing weight, breaking the cycle of fear avoidance that often accompanies joint pain. The cultural impact of the step-up extends beyond the gym. It is the movement of verticality, of ascent. Whether hiking a mountain, climbing the stairs of a subway station, or stepping onto a bus, the step-up is a fundamental interaction with the built and natural environment. As urbanization increases and our environments become more vertical, the ability to step up repeatedly and safely becomes a marker of functional independence. In geriatric populations, the inability to climb stairs is often the deciding factor in moving to a single-story home or an assisted living facility. The low step-up is the proactive defense against this limitation. Technical variations of the low step-up can further enhance its effectiveness. The crossover step-up, where the athlete stands sideways to the box and steps the outside leg across and up, targets the vastus medialis, the teardrop muscle of the quad, and the glute medius from a different angle. The eccentric-only step-up involves stepping up with 2 legs or with assistance and lowering with 1, overloading the negative phase for rapid strength gains. However, for the beginner, the standard low step-up remains the gold standard. The psychological discipline required for the low step-up cannot be overstated. It is tedious. It lacks the explosive gratification of a box jump or the heavy metal allure of a deadlift. It requires patience and a suppression of the ego. The beginner must be willing to look silly using a small box while others are leaping onto towering platforms. But this restraint is the hallmark of the intelligent trainee. By mastering the low step-up, the beginner builds a foundation of single-leg strength that is free of compensation patterns. They learn to trust their legs individually. They build a glute-quad connection that is bulletproof. Ultimately, the low step-up is a lesson in physics and leverage. It teaches that height is irrelevant without control. It demonstrates that the hardest resistance to overcome is often one's own body weight when handled with strict biomechanical integrity. It is the bridge between the rehabilitation clinic and the athletic field, a safe harbor where strength is built rep by rep, inch by inch. It transforms the legs from heavy pillars into dynamic pistons, ready to carry the human machine upward against the relentless pull of the earth.
5. Glute bridge, the awakening of the sleeping giant. To discuss the glute bridge is to discuss the reclamation of the human engine. In the grand schematic of human biomechanics, the gluteus maximus is the primary thruster, the largest and most powerful muscle group in the body, designed by millions of years of evolution to propel us forward, upward, and away from predators. It is the architectural keystone that holds the pelvis in alignment and protects the lumbar spine from the catastrophic shearing forces of gravity. Yet in the 21st century, this muscular powerhouse has fallen silent. We have entered the era of gluteal amnesia, a term coined by spinal biomechanist Dr. Stuart McGill to describe the neurological phenomenon where the glutes literally forget how to fire. This is not a disease of pathogen, it is a disease of lifestyle. We sit at breakfast, we sit in cars, we sit at desks, and we sit on couches. This chronic flexion of the hips causes the psoas and iliacus muscles, the hip flexors, to shorten and tighten. Through a physiological law known as reciprocal inhibition, when one side of a joint is chronically tight, the front, the opposing side, the back, is neurologically downregulated. The brain, in its efficiency, stops sending high-voltage signals to the glutes. The glute bridge is not merely an exercise, it is a neurological defibrillator. It is the specific targeted intervention required to wake the sleeping giant and restore the structural integrity of the human frame. For the beginner, the glute bridge offers a unique advantage that standing exercises cannot: the removal of the balance variable. When a novice attempts to squat or lunge, their central nervous system is overwhelmed by the demand to remain upright. The brain is frantically processing inputs from the inner ear, the eyes, and proprioceptors of the feet just to keep the body from toppling over. In this chaotic neural environment, muscle activation is often secondary to survival. The glute bridge eliminates this noise. By placing the athlete in a supine position, lying on their back, the floor provides a massive stable base of support. Gravity is no longer compressing the spine vertically, it is acting perpendicularly to the torso. This allows the beginner to direct 100% of their mental focus toward a single isolated intention, the contraction of the gluteal muscles. It transforms the floor from a passive surface into a tactile feedback loop.
A laboratory where the mind-muscle connection can be forged without the threat of falling. The technical execution of the glute bridge is a study in pelvic geometry. It begins with the setup, a deceptively simple arrangement that dictates the success or failure of the movement. The athlete lies on their back, knees bent, feet flat on the floor. The placement of the feet is the first critical variable. If the feet are placed too far away from the buttocks, the leverage shifts to the hamstrings. In this position, the beginner will often feel a cramping sensation in the back of the thigh, a sign that the hamstrings are trying to compensate for a lazy glute. If the feet are placed too close to the buttocks, the acute angle of the knee forces the quadriceps to take over, turning the movement into a pseudo-leg extension. The Goldilocks zone, where the shins are roughly vertical at the top of the movement, is where the glute is isolated. But the true secret lies in the pelvis. Before the hips even leave the ground, the athlete must perform a posterior pelvic tilt. This involves flattening the lower back against the floor, closing the gap between the lumbar spine and the ground. This action engages the deep abdominal wall and sets the pelvis in a position where the glutes can achieve maximum shortening. Without this tilt, the beginner is likely to arch their back as they bridge up, using the spinal erectors to lift the hips rather than the glutes. This lumbar bridge is a common error that reinforces back pain rather than alleviating it. The ascent is an act of intention. The cue is not to lift the hips, but to drive the floor away. The athlete must push through the heels, visualizing them as pistons driving into the earth. As the hips rise, the goal is to achieve full hip extension, a straight line from the shoulders through the hips to the knees. This is the moment of truth. In this top position, the glute should be contracted as hard as physically possible, a sensation often described as cracking a walnut between the cheeks. This peak contraction is where the magic of the exercise resides. It is the position of terminal hip extension, a range of motion that is rarely accessed in modern daily life. By holding this position for a count of 2 or 3 seconds, the beginner is sending a potent signal to the nervous system that this range of motion is safe, stable, and strong. It reverses the anterior pelvic tilt that plagues so many office workers,
pulling the pelvis back into a neutral alignment. The glute bridge also serves as a critical diagnostic tool for synergistic dominance. In a healthy movement pattern, the gluteus maximus is the prime mover for hip extension. The hamstrings are the synergists, helpers, and the lower back muscles are stabilizers. However, in the sedentary beginner, this hierarchy is often inverted. The hamstrings and lower back take over the heavy lifting, while the glutes remain dormant. By performing a glute bridge and placing their hands on their own glutes and hamstrings, the beginner can self-assess. Are the hamstrings rock hard while the glutes are soft? Is the lower back cramping? This tactile biofeedback allows the athlete to adjust their technique, perhaps by widening the feet or focusing on the pelvic tilt, until the correct firing order is restored. It is a process of neuromuscular re-education, retraining the brain to use the correct software for the hardware. Culturally and aesthetically, the glute bridge sits at the center of a massive shift in fitness priorities. For decades, leg training was dominated by the quad-centric view of bodybuilding, teardrop thighs and leg extensions. The posterior chain was an afterthought. However, the last 15 years have seen the rise of the glute guy, Brett Contreras, and a global explosion of interest in glute training. What began as a pursuit of aesthetic enhancement, the desire for a rounder, firmer backside, has evolved into a recognition of functional necessity. Physical therapists now prescribe bridges for everything from runner's knee to chronic lower back pain. The logic is sound. If the glutes are weak, the shock of walking and running travels up the chain to the lower back or down the chain to the knees. The glute bridge builds the shock absorbers that protect the joints. It is moved from the rehabilitation clinic to the main floor of the gym, validating the idea that looking good and moving well are not mutually exclusive. Furthermore, the glute bridge is the foundational prerequisite for the hip thrust, an exercise that allows for immense loading with barbells. But the beginner must not rush. The unwitted glute bridge must be mastered first. The ability to control one's own pelvic rhythm is a skill that cannot be bypassed with weight. As the beginner progresses, the single-leg glute bridge awaits, a humbling variation that exposes left-right asymmetries with ruthless efficiency.
If the pelvis drops or rotates during a single-leg bridge, it reveals a lack of rotary stability in the core and weakness in the glute medius. This progression ensures that the glute bridge remains a challenging staple in the athlete's program for years, not just weeks. The physiological implications of the glute bridge extend to the very connective tissue of the body. The fascia, the web of connective tissue that encases our muscles, transmits force across the body. The glutes are connected to the opposite shoulder via the posterior oblique sling. A strong glute bridge strengthens this cross-body connection, improving the efficiency of walking, running, and throwing. It integrates the upper and lower body, creating a unified structure capable of dynamic movement. For the beginner, this means that fixing their glutes can mysteriously fix their shoulder pain or improve their posture. The body is a tensegrity structure, and the glute bridge tightens the cables that hold the mast upright. In the context of the future, as our lives become increasingly automated and sedentary, the glute bridge will likely become a non-negotiable daily vitamin for physical health. Just as we brush our teeth to prevent decay, we will need to perform bridges to prevent structural decay. It is the antidote to the chair, the reversal of the seated pathology. For the beginner, lying on the floor and lifting their hips is the first step in a rebellion against the forces of atrophy. It is a declaration that the body is meant to extend, to drive, and to stand tall. It is the simplest of movements, yet it carries the weight of our evolutionary heritage. To bridge is to remember what we are built for.
6. Wall sit, the stoic furnace of isometric endurance. In a fitness world obsessed with movement, velocity, and repetitions, the wall sit stands as a defiant monolith of stillness. It is an exercise that requires zero equipment, zero space, and zero motion, yet it is universally feared and respected by athletes of every caliber.
For the beginner, the wall sit is the ultimate introduction to the concept of isometric contraction, muscle tension without a change in muscle length. While dynamic exercises like squats and lunges involve the rhythmic pumping of blood and oxygen, the wall sit is a siege. It is a blockade. By holding a static position, the muscles compress the blood vessels, restricting flow and creating a hypoxic, low-oxygen environment. This triggers a physiological and psychological cascade that is distinct from any other exercise on this list. The wall sit is not just about building thigh endurance, it is a crucible for mental resilience, a test of will where the only enemy is the urge to stand up. The anatomy of the wall sit targets the quadriceps with ruthless precision. When the beginner slides down the wall into a seated position, the four muscles of the quadriceps group, the rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, and vastus intermedius, are tasked with preventing gravity from collapsing the knee joint. Because there is no movement, there is no relief phase. In a squat, there is a moment at the top where the bones support the weight and the muscles can briefly relax. In a wall sit, the tension is constant, unrelenting, and absolute. This constant tension recruits motor units in a specific pattern. Initially, the slow twitch, type 1 fibers, which are designed for endurance, take the load. As they fatigue and run out of fuel, the body is forced to recruit the fast twitch, type 2 fibers, which are typically reserved for explosive movements. This motor unit recruitment ladder ensures that the wall sit trains the entire spectrum of muscle fibers, despite the lack of motion. Technically, the wall sit appears simple, but its effectiveness lies in the geometry of the angles. The gold standard is the double 90. The hip should be flexed at a 90-degree angle, and the knee should be flexed at a 90-degree angle. The shins must be vertical, parallel to the wall behind the athlete. A common error among beginners is to place the feet too far forward, creating an obtuse angle at the knee that reduces the load on the quads.
Or too far back, placing shearing stress on the knees. The back must be flat against the wall, with the head touching the surface to ensure spinal alignment. The hands are the telltale sign of the struggle. Beginners will instinctively push against their thighs to offload the weight. To maintain integrity, the hands should hang by the sides or be held out in front. This ensures that the legs and only the legs are bearing the burden. The sensation of the wall sit is unique. It begins with a dull pressure, manageable and deceptive. Around the 20 or 30-second mark for a beginner, the burn arrives. This burning sensation is not caused by lactic acid as previously believed, but by the accumulation of hydrogen ions and other metabolic waste products that cannot be flushed out because the tensed muscle has clamped down on the veins. This accumulation lowers the pH of the muscle environment, creating an acidic state that triggers pain receptors. This is the pain cave. It is here that the wall sit transcends physical training and becomes mental conditioning. The beginner must learn to dissociate from the discomfort, to breathe rhythmically, and to find a place of calm within the fire. This stoic discipline, the ability to endure discomfort without reacting, translates directly to other areas of life and athletics. It teaches the brain that discomfort is temporary and survivable. Historically, the wall sit, often called the Roman chair or simply static hold, was a staple of old-school physical education and military discipline. It was often used as a punishment because of its deceptive difficulty. It looks like sitting but feels like burning. However, its reputation has been rehabilitated by modern sports science, particularly in the realm of alpine skiing. Skiers must hold semi-squatted positions for minutes at a time while navigating slopes, requiring immense isometric strength. The wall sit became the primary dryland conditioning tool for these athletes. Furthermore, it is a staple in rehabilitation protocols for patellar tendinitis. Isometric loading has been shown to have an analgesic, pain-relieving effect on tendons. For a beginner with jumper's knee, a wall sit can actually reduce pain while strengthening the structure, making it a therapeutic weapon as well as a strengthening one. A profound and cutting-edge development in the science of wall sits is their impact on blood pressure. Recent meta-analyses published in major medical journals,
including the British Journal of Sports Medicine, have suggested that isometric exercises like the wall sit are more effective at lowering resting blood pressure than traditional aerobic exercise like running or walking. The mechanism is believed to be reactive hyperemia. When the muscles contract isometrically, they restrict blood flow. When the participant stands up and relaxes, blood rushes back into the vessels with high force, triggering the release of nitric oxide, a potent vasodilator that relaxes and widens the arteries. For the millions of beginners entering fitness for health reasons, specifically to manage hypertension, the wall sit is a potential lifesaver. It is a prescription for cardiovascular health that requires no running shoes and no treadmill. The cultural impact of the wall sit is seeing a resurgence through the minimalist fitness movement. As people move away from gym memberships and complex machinery, the value of bodyweight training is skyrocketing. The wall sit is the ultimate anywhere exercise. It can be done in a hotel room, an office, or a park. It represents the democratization of fitness, the idea that you do not need money to get strong, you only need gravity and a wall. It also fits into the trend of micro-workouts or exercise snacking, where busy individuals perform short bursts of exercise throughout the day. A 2-minute wall sit while brushing teeth or waiting for coffee is a viable strategy for accumulating training volume.
Variations of the wall sit allow for endless progression. Once the beginner can hold a 2-minute sit, they can progress to the single leg wall sit. This variation is exponentially harder as the entire body weight is supported by one quadricep. It introduces a rotary stability component, as the core must fight to keep the pelvis flat against the wall. Another variation involves holding a weight, a dumbbell or a heavy book, on the lap, increasing the mechanical load. Squeezing a ball between the knees activates the adductors, inner thigh, while wrapping a resistance band around the knees and pushing outward activates the glute medius. These tweaks allow the wall sit to evolve from a beginner's challenge to an elite athlete's conditioner. Philosophically, the wall sit teaches the art of yielding to conquer. In most aspects of life, we solve problems by moving, by doing, by acting. The wall sit asks us to solve the problem by staying put.
It forces the beginner to confront their own internal dialogue. When the legs start to shake, a phenomenon caused by the nervous system struggling to coordinate the firing of fatigued motor units, the instinct is to quit. The wall sit teaches the beginner to observe the shaking, to acknowledge the burning, and to decide to stay anyway. It is a lesson in time dilation. 30 seconds on a clock feels like an eternity in a wall sit. This distorts the perception of time and teaches patience. In conclusion, the wall sit is far more than a thigh burner. It is a sophisticated physiological tool that manipulates blood flow, blood pressure, and muscle fiber recruitment in ways that dynamic exercises cannot. It is a safe harbor for those with joint pain, a medical intervention for those with high blood pressure, and a mental dojo for anyone seeking to harden their resolve. For the beginner, the wall sit provides a base of muscular endurance that underpins every other activity. It ensures that when the going gets tough in a hike, a run, or a game, the legs have the deep reservoirs of strength required to carry on. It is the exercise of the statue, the training of the immovable object.
7. Standing calf raise, the propulsion engine and the second heart. To overlook the standing calf raise is to misunderstand the fundamental mechanics of human locomotion and the intricate hydraulic systems that keep us alive. In the hierarchy of muscular aesthetics, the calves are often relegated to the status of an afterthought, a genetic roll of the dice that determines whether one possesses diamonds or toothpicks. This superficial dismissal masks a profound biological truth. The triceps soriae, the collective term for the gastrocnemius and soleus muscles, is the engine of bipedalism. It is the anatomical feature that distinguishes the human stride from the clumsy gait of the great apes. When we analyze the standing calf raise, we are not merely discussing the hypertrophy of the lower leg. We are investigating the second heart of the human body, a critical pump responsible for defying gravity and returning deoxygenated blood from the extremities back to the lungs. For the beginner, mastering this exercise is a step towards vascular longevity, athletic propulsion, and the stabilization of the entire kinetic chain. The anatomy of the calf is a study in specialized duality. The muscle group is composed primarily of two distinct entities, the gastrocnemius and the soleus. The standing calf raise is unique because it targets the gastrocnemius, the larger diamond-shaped muscle that sits superficially on the back of the leg. The gastrocnemius is a biarticular muscle, meaning it crosses two joints, the knee and the ankle. This creates a complex length-tension relationship. When the leg is straight, as it is in the standing calf raise, the gastrocnemius is stretched across the knee, allowing it to engage fully and generate maximum force. Conversely, when the knee is bent, as in a seated calf raise, the gastrocnemius is slackened and rendered mechanically disadvantageous, shifting the load almost entirely to the soleus. Therefore, the standing variation is the only exercise that effectively develops the show muscle of the calf, the powerhouse responsible for explosive sprinting and emptying. However, the significance of the calf raise extends far beyond athletic power. It plays a pivotal role in hemodynamics, the physics of blood flow. The human circulatory system faces a massive engineering challenge, pumping blood against gravity from the feet back up to the chest. The heart, powerful as it is, cannot do it alone.
Evolution has solved this problem with the musculovenous pump. Deep within the calf muscles lie large veins containing one-way valves. Every time the calf contracts, it squeezes these veins, shooting blood upward toward the heart. When the muscle relaxes, the valves close to prevent backflow. This is why the calves are medically referred to as the peripheral heart. For the modern beginner, who likely spends hours seated with pooled blood in the lower extremities, the standing calf raise is a therapeutic intervention. It manually operates this pump, flushing out metabolic waste, reducing the risk of deep vein thrombosis, DVT, and alleviating the swelling, edema that plagues the sedentary population. The mechanics of the standing calf raise are governed by the principles of a Class II lever system, the same physics used in a wheelbarrow. The ball of the foot acts as the fulcrum, the body weight is the load situated in the middle, transmitted through the tibia, and the calf muscle provides the effort at the heel. This lever advantage allows the human calf to lift immense loads, often far exceeding body weight. However, this mechanical efficiency is also why calves are notoriously difficult to grow. They are designed for efficiency, not hypertrophy. To force them to adapt, the beginner must employ strict, deliberate technique that defies the body's natural tendency to cheat.
The most critical technical element of the standing calf raise is the manipulation of the Achilles tendon. The Achilles is the thickest and strongest tendon in the human body, designed to act as a biological spring. During walking or running, it stores elastic energy upon impact and releases it to propel the body forward, sparing the muscles from doing all the work. In the gym, this elasticity is the enemy of muscle growth. If a beginner bounces through their calf raises, they are riding the tendon's recoil rather than contracting the muscle fibers. To counteract this, the pause principle must be enforced. The athlete must descend slowly, stretching the heel below the level of the toes, using a step or block, and hold that deep stretch for a full second. This dissipates the stored elastic energy in the tendon. Then and only then should they drive up. At the top, another hard squeeze is required. This dead stop style of training forces the gastrocnemius to perform the actual work, stimulating the type 2 fast twitch fibers that are prone to growth.
The setup for the beginner need not be complex. While gyms offer standing calf raise machines with padded shoulder yokes, the movement can be performed with a simple step and a dumbbell, or even body weight on a staircase. The ball of the foot should be placed on the edge of the step, ensuring that the toes are spread and gripping the surface. A common error is sickling, or rolling the weight onto the pinky toe, which stresses the lateral ligaments of the ankle. The weight must be driven through the first and second metatarsals, the big toe mound. This alignment ensures that the force is transmitted directly into the meat of the gastrocnemius. Historically, the calf has been a symbol of virility and athletic potential dating back to Greco-Roman antiquity. Statues of Hercules and Achilles feature exaggerated diamond-cut calves, representing the power to traverse the earth and conquer foes. In the golden era of bodybuilding, Arnold Schwarzenegger famously cut off the bottoms of his sweatpants to expose his lagging calves to public ridicule, motivating him to train them relentlessly. This highlights a psychological reality. The calves are stubborn. They possess a high density of androgen receptors, but are conditioned by the thousands of steps we take daily. They are accustomed to low-intensity volume. To shock them, the beginner must subject them to high-intensity loading and full ranges of motion that walking simply does not provide. Culturally, the neglect of the calf muscle in modern fitness reflects a bias toward mirror muscles, the chest and arms. Yet as we look toward the future of an aging population, the calf raise is emerging as a critical biomarker for independence. Sarcopenia, muscle loss, hits the lower body first. Weak calves lead to a shuffling gait, an inability to clear obstacles, and a reduced walking speed. Walking speed is now recognized by geriatricians as a sixth vital sign, strongly correlated with mortality rates. By training the standing calf raise, the beginner is essentially preserving their ability to walk confidently into old age. They are maintaining the spring in their step, literally and metaphorically. Furthermore, the standing calf raise has a profound impact on ankle mobility. The modern shoe, with its elevated heel, places the calf in a chronically shortened position. This leads to the loss of dorsiflexion, the ability to pull the toes up, which in turn compromises squat depth and knee health.
By performing calf raises with a deficit, dropping the heel below the toes, the beginner actively stretches the calf under load. This eccentric loading causes sarcomerogenesis, the addition of muscle units in series, effectively lengthening the muscle tissue over time. It is a dual-purpose exercise, strengthening the engine while tuning the suspension. The philosophical implication of the calf raise is one of persistence. It is a small movement, a matter of inches. It lacks the grandeur of the deadlift or the drama of the squat, yet it supports the entire structure. It teaches the beginner that the foundation matters. It reminds us that our connection to the earth is mediated through the feet and ankles, and that stability starts from the ground up. In a world that often prioritizes the visible and the immediate, the standing calf raise is a testament to the importance of the hidden and the enduring. It is the exercise of the traveler, the marcher, and the survivor.
8. Seated leg extension, the isolationist's scalpel in a compound world. The seated leg extension is perhaps the most controversial piece of machinery on the gym floor, a lightning rod for debate between functional training purists and hypertrophy enthusiasts. For the beginner navigating this polarized landscape, it is essential to strip away the dogma and examine the biomechanical reality. The leg extension is the only exercise in the standard repertoire that isolates the quadriceps in an open kinetic chain (OKC) environment. In a squat or lunge, closed kinetic chain, the foot is fixed to the floor and the force is distributed across the ankles, knees, hips, and lower back. In the leg extension, the foot moves freely in space and the torso is anchored. This distinction is not merely academic, it fundamentally alters the stimulus applied to the muscle. For the beginner, the seated leg extension acts as a surgical tool, allowing them to target the anterior thigh without the limiting factors of core strength, balance, or cardiovascular fatigue. It is the pure distillation of quadriceps engagement. To understand the utility of this machine, we must first understand the anatomy of the quadriceps femoris. As the name implies, this group consists of 4 muscles: the vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, vastus intermedialis, and the rectus femoris. The squat is excellent for the 3 vastus muscles, but it often fails to fully stimulate the rectus femoris. This is because the rectus femoris is the only quad muscle that crosses the hip joint.
During a squat, as the knee bends, lengthening the quad, the hip also bends, shortening the rectus femoris at the top. This simultaneous lengthening and shortening creates a phenomenon known as active insufficiency, rendering the muscle mechanically weak and underactive. The seated leg extension solves this paradox. By fixing the hip in a seated position and extending the knee, the machine allows the rectus femoris to contract fully and forcefully. For the beginner seeking complete leg development, the leg extension is not optional. It is the missing piece of the puzzle. The engineering of the modern leg extension machine is a marvel of biomechanics, largely pioneered by Arthur Jones of Nautilus in the 1970s. Early resistance training was limited by the constant gravity of dumbbells. The weight was heavy at some points and light at others. The leg extension utilizes a cam,
a kidney-shaped pulley that alters the resistance curve to match the human strength curve. The quadriceps are weakest at the very bottom, full flexion, and at the very top, full extension. The cam reduces the resistance at these extremes and maximizes it in the middle range, ensuring that the muscle is under constant, appropriate tension throughout the arc of motion. For the beginner, this means a safer, more efficient workout that maximizes fiber recruitment without overloading the joints at their most vulnerable angles. However, the controversy surrounding the leg extension must be addressed with rigorous honesty. Detractors argue that the exercise places excessive shear force on the anterior cruciate ligament, ACL. Because the resistance pad is placed on the shins, the force of the weight tries to slide the tibia shin bone forward relative to the femur thigh bone. This is known as anterior tibial translation. While this is mechanically true, the danger is often vastly overstated for healthy populations. Research indicates that the strain placed on the ACL during a controlled leg extension is well within the safety limits of the ligament for anyone without a pre-existing injury. In fact, in rehabilitation settings, the leg extension is often reintroduced after the initial healing phase of ACL reconstruction to restore quad bulk, which is the primary protector of the knee joint. For the beginner with healthy knees, the risk is minimal provided the movement is performed with control rather than explosive momentum. The execution of the seated leg extension requires precise alignment. The machine's pivot point, the axis upon which the lever arm rotates, must be perfectly aligned with the beginner's knee joint. If the knee is too far forward or backward, the machine will apply shearing forces that can cause discomfort. Once aligned, the beginner should grasp the side handles firmly. This bracing is crucial. It pulls the pelvis down into the seat, preventing the hips from lifting as the weight goes up. The movement itself should be a smooth, sweeping arc. The kick is a misnomer. It should be a squeeze. At the top of the movement, when the legs are fully straight, the beginner should hold the contraction for a full second. This peak contraction is unique to the leg extension. In a standing squat, there is no tension on the quads at the top, lockout. In the machine, the tension is highest at the top.
This creates a hypoxic environment in the muscle, triggering metabolic stress, the pump, which is a potent driver of muscle growth. The psychological benefit of the seated leg extension for a beginner is immense. Compound movements like squats are technically demanding and can be intimidating. The fear of crushing oneself under a barbell is real. The leg extension offers a safe environment to fail. If the beginner cannot lift the weight, they simply lower the lever. There is no risk of falling or spinal injury. Furthermore, the visual feedback is immediate. The beginner can see their quadriceps contracting, bulging, and moving under the skin. This visual connection fosters the mind-muscle connection, helping the novice learn what it feels like to voluntarily fire these muscle fibers. This neural pathway, once established on the machine, transfers over to the squat, making the beginner more effective at compound lifts. In the context of injury prevention, the leg extension targets the vastus medialis oblique, the teardrop-shaped muscle on the inner knee. The VMO is responsible for patellar tracking, keeping the kneecap gliding smoothly in its groove. Weakness in the VMO is a leading cause of patellofemoral pain syndrome. By performing leg extensions, particularly the final 30 degrees of the movement, the beginner strengthens the stabilizer, effectively armor-plating the knee against the wear and tear of running and jumping. Culturally, the leg extension represents the industrialization of fitness, the belief that technology can optimize human physiology. While the pendulum swung toward functional training, kettlebells body weight in the 2000s, there is a current renaissance of machine training. High-level bodybuilders and rehabilitation specialists alike are championing the hybrid approach. Use squats for systemic strength, use leg extensions for local hypertrophy. For the beginner, this balanced approach is optimal. Future iterations of the leg extension are moving into the digital realm. Isokinetic machines and adaptive resistance motors, like those found in high-tech home gyms, can adjust the weight in milliseconds, pushing the user down, eccentric loading, harder than they can push up. This technology promises to make the humble leg extension one of the most efficient growth stimuli available. Ultimately, the seated leg extension is the specialist in a team of generalists.
It does one thing, contract the quadriceps, and it does it better than any other tool in existence. It allows the beginner to push their legs to absolute failure without systemic exhaustion. It is the safe harbor where muscle is built through focus and fire.
By integrating this machine, the beginner learns to isolate, to squeeze, and to endure the burning accumulation of metabolites, forging thighs that are not only strong, but visually impressive and structurally sound. It is not a replacement for the squat, but it is its indispensable partner.
9. Standing hamstring curl, the invisible brake and the architect of stability. In the grand design of the human musculoskeletal system, the hamstring group is frequently the victim of a dangerous paradox. It is critically important, yet chronically invisible. While the quadriceps, the large muscles on the front of the thigh, demand attention in the mirror and are the primary movers in visible actions like kicking or jumping, the hamstrings operate in the shadows of the posterior chain. They are the unsung laborers of locomotion. For the beginner, the standing hamstring curl is the gateway into understanding this complex muscle group. It is an exercise of isolation, precision, and rehabilitation that addresses the fundamental imbalance plaguing the modern physique. We live in a quad-dominant society, a result of movements that prioritize pushing forward and a sedentary lifestyle that keeps the hips flexed. This imbalance is the silent architect of knee pain, lower back instability, and catastrophic soft tissue injuries. The standing hamstring curl, often dismissed as a lightweight accessory movement, is in reality a profound corrective intervention that restores the antagonistic balance necessary for a healthy, functioning body. To fully appreciate the standing hamstring curl, we must first conduct a forensic analysis of the anatomy it targets. The hamstring is not a single muscle, but a triad of biological pables: the biceps femoris, long and short heads, the semitendinosus, and the semimembranosus. These muscles are biarticular, meaning they cross two joints, the hip and the knee. Their function is dualistic. They extend the hip, pulling the leg back, and flex the knee, pulling the heel to the glute. The standing hamstring curl isolates the latter function, knee flexion. This isolation is crucial for the beginner because compound movements like the deadlift or the kettlebell swing primarily train the hamstrings as hip extensors. While hip extension is vital for power, knee flexion is vital for stability and deceleration. When we walk or run, the hamstring crests as a dynamic brake, decelerating the lower leg to prevent the knee from snapping into hyperextension. If this braking mechanism is weak, the joint absorbs the shock, leading to the wear and tear of cartilage and ligaments. The standing hamstring curl strengthens the brake pads of the human machine. The execution of the standing hamstring curl is a study in strict biomechanical discipline.
Unlike the machine version found in gyms where a pad locks the thighs in place, the freestanding version requires the athlete to stabilize their own body. The beginner stands upright, perhaps holding a wall or a sturdy chair for balance. The non-working leg is the pillar, rooted firmly into the ground. The working leg performs a seemingly simple action, lifting the heel toward the buttocks. However, the nuance lies in what doesn't move. A pervasive error is the recruitment of the hip flexors. As the beginner curls the heel up, they often instinctively drive the knee forward. This shortens the range of motion and disengages the hamstring. To perform this correctly, the knees must remain aligned, side by side. The thigh of the working leg should remain perpendicular to the floor, acting as a fixed axis of rotation. The only movement should occur at the knee joint. This requires a conscious dissociation of the hip and knee, a motor skill that enhances the beginner's overall body awareness. The resistance curve of the standing hamstring curl can be manipulated to suit the beginner's progression. Initially, gravity and the weight of the leg itself are sufficient. The lower leg weighs approximately 6% of the total body mass. For a 180-pound individual, that is roughly 10 pounds of leverage being lifted. As strength increases, the addition of ankle weights introduces a new physics equation. Because the weight is placed at the distal end of the lever, the ankle, far from the fulcrum, the knee, a small amount of weight creates a massive amount of torque. A 5-pound ankle weight feels significantly heavier than a 5-pound dumbbell held in the hand. This mechanical disadvantage is highly effective for hypertrophy. It allows the beginner to stimulate muscle growth with minimal external load, sparing the spine from the compressive forces associated with heavy barbells. It is a low-risk, high-reward investment in posterior strength. From a rehabilitation and injury prevention standpoint, the standing hamstring curl is intimately linked to the health of the anterior cruciate ligament, ACL. The ACL prevents the tibia shin bone from sliding too far forward relative to the femur. The hamstrings are the functional agonists to the ACL. When they contract, they pull the tibia backwards, reducing the strain on the ligament. In sports science, this is known as the ACL hamstring synergy. For beginners,
Particularly females who are statistically more prone to ACL injuries due to wider pelvic angles, the Q angle, strengthening the hamstrings via knee flexion is a non-negotiable insurance policy. It builds a muscular safety net that protects the structural integrity of the knee during the chaotic movements of daily life, such as slipping on ice or missing a step on a staircase. The standing hamstring curl also addresses the neurological phenomenon of sensory amnesia in the back of the legs. Because we cannot see our hamstrings and because we rarely deliberately contract them in isolation, the neural pathways to these muscles often atrophy. The mind-muscle connection is weak. When a beginner performs a squat, their brain screams at the quads to fire, but whispers to the hamstrings. The standing curl changes the volume of this conversation. By isolating the muscle in a single joint movement, the beginner can focus entirely on the sensation of the hamstring shortening. They can palpate, touch the muscle with their hand while curling, creating a tactile feedback loop that reinforces the neural drive.
This awakened neural pathway then carries over to compound lifts. The next time the athlete squats, their brain is better equipped to recruit the hamstring, leading to a stronger, more stable lift. Culturally, the standing hamstring curl represents a shift from mirror training to longevity training. In the golden era of bodybuilding, the focus was often on the sweep of the outer quad. Hamstrings were an afterthought. Today, with the rise of functional fitness and an aging population that wishes to remain active, the focus has shifted to the posterior chain. Physical therapists and trainers are prioritizing the back of the body to counteract the forward slumped posture of the digital age. The standing hamstring curl is the accessible entry point into this philosophy. It requires no gym membership, no expensive machinery, and no spotter. It is the democratization of posterior chain training. Furthermore, the standing hamstring curl serves as a critical bridge to more advanced athletic movements. Sprinting, the pinnacle of human locomotion, is essentially a high-velocity hamstring curl followed by a hip extension. The recovery phase of the sprint cycle, where the heel snaps up toward the glute, is powered by the hamstrings. While a beginner may not be training for the 100-meter dash, the mechanics of walking and jogging utilize the same pattern,
albeit at a lower intensity. By strengthening the specific motion of knee flexion, the beginner improves the efficiency of their gait. They become lighter on their feet. The heavy feeling in the legs that many novices complain of is often a result of weak hamstrings failing to efficiently lift the lower leg during the swing phase of walking. Technique variations allow the standing hamstring curl to remain relevant as the beginner advances. The use of resistance bands adds a component of accommodating resistance. The exercise gets harder as the band stretches, matching the muscle strength curve. Isometric holds, where the leg is held at a 90-degree angle for time, build tendon stiffness and resilience. Eccentric focused repetitions, where the beginner uses two hands or assistants to lift the weight and then lowers it slowly with one leg, are a potent stimulus for lengthening the muscle fascicles, which is the primary defense against hamstring strains. In the future landscape of fitness technology, we are likely to see smart wearables that monitor the activation ratio between quadriceps and hamstrings during daily activities. Until then, the standing hamstring curl remains the most effective analog tool for calibration. It is a humble exercise, devoid of glamour, but it performs a heroic function. It balances the forces across the knee, protects the ligaments, and completes the physique. It teaches the beginner that true strength is not just about what you can push away, but what you can pull back. It is the invisible brake that allows the human machine to travel safely at speed.
10. Leg stretches, the ritual of recovery and the science of tensegrity. We arrive at the final entry, not with a bang of exertion, but with the deliberate, disciplined silence of the stretch. To classify leg stretches merely as an exercise is to underestimate their role. They are the maintenance protocol for the biological machine. In the fervor of beginner fitness, the focus is almost exclusively on contraction, on the shortening of muscle fibers to generate force. Stretching is the yin to this yang. It is the restoration of length, the realignment of fascia, and the modulation of the nervous system. For the beginner whose muscles are reacting to novel stimuli with inflammation and stiffness, delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS, a comprehensive stretching routine is not an optional luxury. It is a physiological necessity for consistency. Without the restoration of range of motion, the body stiffens into a cage of its own making, limiting future performance and inviting injury. The physiology of stretching is a complex negotiation between the mechanical properties of tissue and the protective mechanisms of the nervous system. When a beginner stretches a leg muscle, for example the hamstrings, they are not simply pulling on a rubber band, they are engaging with the stretch reflex. Inside the muscle belly lie sensory receptors called muscle spindles. When a muscle is lengthened too quickly or too far, these spindles fire a signal to the spinal cord, which immediately sends a contraction signal back to the muscle to prevent it from tearing. This is why a novice feels a resistance or a fight in the muscle. Effective stretching is the art of calming this reflex. By holding a static stretch gently for 30 to 60 seconds, the beginner allows a different receptor, the Golgi tendon organ, or GTO, to engage. The GTO detects tension and after a period of sustained hold inhibits the muscle spindle, allowing the muscle to relax and lengthen further. This phenomenon, known as autogenic inhibition, is the biological basis of flexibility training. The big three stretches for the beginner leg routine correspond to the major muscle groups we have trained, the quadriceps, the hamstrings, and the calves. The standing quad stretch, often performed by holding the ankle behind the glute, is essential for counteracting the hip flexion of sitting. However, the beginner must be taught the nuance of pelvic positioning. If the back is arched, the stretch is lost.
The glute must be squeezed to push the hip forward, targeting the rectus femoris. The hamstring stretch, best performed seated or supine to protect the lower back, requires a neutral spine. The goal is not to touch the toes, but to hinge at the hips until tension is felt in the muscle belly. The calf stretch, performed against a wall, is critical for ankle mobility, which we have established as the foundation of the squat. Beyond the muscles themselves, we must consider the fascia. Fascia is the connective tissue web that encases every muscle fiber, bundle, and organ. It is a continuous system. The fascia on the bottom of the foot is connected to the fascia of the calf, the hamstring, the back, and all the way up to the skull.
This concept of anatomy trains, popularized by Thomas Myers, explains why tight calves can cause headaches or why tight hamstrings can cause lower back pain. Stretching does not just lengthen the red muscle tissue, it hydrates and remodels the white fascial tissue. When fascia becomes dehydrated and matted down due to inactivity, it acts like shrink wrap, restricting the muscle's ability to slide and contract. Stretching generates piezoelectricity, a small electric charge created by mechanical pressure, which signals the body to produce fresh collagen and lubricate the tissues with hyaluronic acid. For the beginner, stretching is essentially oiling the gears of the machine. The timing of stretching has been the subject of intense scientific debate over the last 2 decades. The old paradigm of static stretching before a workout has been largely dismantled. Research suggests that prolonged static stretching prior to lifting can temporarily reduce power output and destabilize joints. Therefore, for the beginner, the prescription is clear: dynamic stretching, movement-based mobility, before the workout to warm up the fluids, and static stretching, long holds, after the workout to cool down. This post-workout window is crucial. The muscles are warm, pliable, and filled with blood. Stretching at this time maximizes the plastic deformation of the tissue, permanent improvements in length, rather than just temporary elastic deformation. The psychological component of the post-workout stretch is equally profound. High-intensity exercise stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight mode. Adrenaline and cortisol course through the veins.
Stretching serves as the bridge to the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode. The rhythmic breathing required during deep stretching stimulates the vagus nerve, lowering heart rate and blood pressure. It signals the brain that the threat of the workout is over and that the recovery process can begin. For the beginner, this ritual is essential for preventing burnout. It creates a positive, calming end to the session, leaving them with a sense of well-being rather than just exhaustion. It transforms the workout from a stressor into a complete cycle of stress and resolution. We must also address the concept of sensory tolerance. Modern pain science suggests that increases in flexibility are often not due to the muscle physically getting longer, but due to the brain becoming more tolerant of the sensation of stretching. The beginner learns that the discomfort of a stretch is safe. They learn to distinguish between the good pain of a stretch and the bad pain of an injury. This increased sensory tolerance allows them to access ranges of motion that were previously locked by the brain's protective fear. It is a form of exposure therapy for the nervous system. The cultural trajectory of stretching has moved from the fringes to the center. Once the domain of gymnasts and martial artists, mobility work is now a billion-dollar industry. We see the rise of assisted stretching labs where practitioners manually stretch clients, and the explosion of yoga as a complementary practice to strength training. For the beginner, this means that resources are abundant. However, it also means they must discern between flashy contortionism and functional mobility. The goal is not to put one's foot behind one's head. The goal is to possess enough range of motion to squat deeply, lunge freely, and move through life without restriction. Future predictions for flexibility training involve the integration of vibration therapy and electrical stimulation to enhance the stretching effect. Devices that vibrate at specific frequencies can confuse the muscle spindles, allowing for a deeper stretch with less pain. However, no technology can replace the fundamental discipline of the practice. In conclusion, the inclusion of leg stretches in the top 10 is a statement of priorities. It asserts that durability is as important as capacity. It recognizes that a strong muscle that cannot lengthen is a brittle muscle prone to snapping. For the beginner,
the stretching session is the time to audit the body, to check in with tight spots, and to express gratitude for the work the legs have performed. It is the quiet conclusion to the noisy business of building strength, ensuring that the athlete remains supple, adaptable, and ready to fight another day. It is the promise that we are building a body designed to last.